Hi, can everyone hear me? All right, so good morning, everyone. I see we're still a bit sleepy. Energies. So this is the open source surprise, or why I believe not everyone is doing open source, because we all love open source, but like with a raise of hands here, who in the crowd is doing like actively contributing to open source? Right, and who would like to be able to actively contribute to open source? Right, so that's a lot more hands. So a little bit about me, like you heard. I work at Testim.io. We do really cool stuff. This is Bimper, my dog, my wife for it. And I do a bunch of open source stuff. I worked on Bluebird, which is a Promise library. We have around 8.5 million downloads a week now. We hope to get it a bit down. I work on Node, I work on Sign-On, a bit on Mobex and other stuff. And like I said, I teach high school. And I'm going to touch a bit on that. All right, so the first thing I want to say is that this is an opinionated talk. It's about dev culture. It's about my experience as a person, and I'm just one person. If your experience in open source or your experience in the development industry has been different, then it's equally valid, and like you shouldn't feel like your experience is wrong and mine is right just because I'm here in the front. Right. So this talk is going to be about fear. It's going to be about open source, and it's going to be about a thing called self-efficacy. So the first thing is, what is fear? Why are we scared? So in essence, fear is this thing that we feel when we start sensing danger, right? It's a sense of danger. It's this like, hey, this animal is going to eat me sort of sensation. And it's a bit of a scary sensation. And the first big thing I want to start with is that we have a culture problem, right? Who has seen posts like this on the internet? We have people saying, hey, I think Python is terrible. Hey, I think JavaScript is terrible. Angular sucks. Angular say no. React sucks. Vue sucks. Like, the internet is full of posts telling us that things are stupid or terrible. And the thing is, a lot of times, these posts are by people that haven't actually used the software. Like, a new library comes out, let's say, I don't know, like a new Angular, and then immediately, like a day after, you'd have people going on the internet without ever using the software saying, hey, this new library is terrible, you shouldn't use it. If you use it, you're not a real programmer. And it's a really problematic culture. And a part of it is that the web stack, like for those of you who are web programmers, changes every few years. Like most of the tools that we knew a few years ago are not relevant anymore. And that's really scary. And we don't know if our skill set will be relevant in a few years, because things like everyone who was doing web a few years ago was using jQuery. And now almost no one in new projects is using jQuery. Not that there's a problem with jQuery, but things are changing a lot. And it's a brutal industry, because we also had like rounds of cutoffs and really like in 2008, if you remember, and in 2000, where a lot of people lost their jobs. So a lot of us are scared for our jobs. And the paradigm itself is changing. Who remembers when blockchain was the biggest thing in the industry a year ago? Right. It's changing very quickly. Machine learning is very hot right now. I don't know if it will be hot in 2 years. And everything is changing constantly in terms of trends in the industry. And this is creating a lot of fear. It's causing a culture of shaming and defensiveness, where we call people stupid. Either you know like TypeScript, or you're doing it wrong. Either you know Python, or you're stupid. Either you know Rust and not C++, and it's a very problematic culture. And we judge things we don't know harshly, right? So let's say we are like just the other day, I had someone come to me, and I was telling them about the project I did, and I did it like in React, and they said, "Hey, so you do React, huh? Like, are you sure you're still gonna have a job in 2 or 3 years?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like, and even if it won't be in React, it will be something else." But the first thing people do when they hear about a new technology is criticize it without trying it, and they dismiss it, and like. I used to do this a lot. It's not that I am this special snowflake that never criticized or spoke harshly about things I didn't know. But people are very loyal to certain technologies. Like you'd have people who are PHP programmers for 20 years, and everything that's not PHP is bad, or people who are .NET programmers, and everything is not .NET is bad. And the truth is, like web and .NET and Java and all those things are not that different from each other. And we call people stupid. I've seen people asking questions online and getting told, maybe you shouldn't be a programmer, like every week. I participate in a bunch of chats in Stack Overflow and like Reddit and a bunch of other places, and people say terrible things to each other. A big part of it is we don't know how we measure as programmers. There is no objective measure of saying on a scale of 1 to 10, like an athlete, that says this programmer is very good, this programmer is very bad. We can't assess our skill set very accurately and very easily. So everything so far was a bit depressing. I was saying the culture is bad. I was saying the people are nasty to each other. They call each other stupid. So why are we here? Why are we in this conference? Because building things is awesome. Like the notion of creating things is great. You get to build stuff. It's exciting. You get to be creative. And there's very few jobs where you get to do this as much as programming. And we have a culture where we tell people everyone can program. Like there is learn how to do C++ in 24 hours. Learn how to build JavaScript in a month. If you are not a programmer, we will teach you programming in 2 weeks. And we keep telling people it's easy. Coding is easy. You should be good at it. And it's causing a lot of gatekeeping. We tell people that exploration is great. You should do side projects. You should do things at home. And that everything should be easy. And then when they start actually programming, they're seeing that it's actually quite frustrating. And it's creating a very bad culture. So programming is not easy. We should stop saying that. Working on challenging tasks, and like I teach kids programming, and I have the privilege of having a constant reminder of programming being hard. But we keep telling people that programming is easy. And it's hard and frustrating. And this thing leads to imposter syndrome, which is basically that fear we have inside that maybe we're not adequate, maybe we're imposters, maybe they will catch on to us. And this is actually my real imposter syndrome score. It's an 81. And all of you can go to that link, not right now, but and take the test. This is the actual imposter syndrome test. It's 20 questions about how you approach your job and what you feel about the things you'll do. Because a lot of us, including me, have this feeling of maybe I'm a fraud, maybe they will catch on to me. Like when I get a new task in my job, that's the first thing I think about. Like maybe I won't do it on time and they'll catch on to me and they will fire me because of this culture of fear. And it's also leading to big issues in inclusivity. Because when they say, when people say, hey, maybe we should be friendlier towards like minorities or women and not use like gendered speech in the README, for example. Like maintainers, we only care about people being happy and collaborating with us in the project. We are very excited about things we build. If someone says, don't use a certain word or a certain phrase, we don't mind. We just want you to be happy and to contribute. But then you have hundreds of people who will come and say, I feel very strongly about being able to use the word dog in the README. And I don't get that because people have very strong opinions about what other people get offended by. And I don't understand where it's coming from. And I think that all of that is fear. And fear breeds lack of empathy. And fear kills productivity. But fear is depressing. Enough about fear. Let's talk about open source. So the first thing I want to say about open source is that you don't have to do open source. You really don't have to do open source. You don't have to do side projects. You don't have to code at home. You don't need to have hobby. You don't need to attend conferences if you don't like that. If you go at home, you go to your home and you play the guitar or you dance or you do something else that is not programming related, that's entirely fine. Don't let anyone shame you for this. I know some amazing programmers who don't do any code at home. I know amazing programmers who don't go to conferences. But why are we all here? Why are we in this conference? Why are we so excited about being here? Because building things is awesome, right? You remember the creative part you love. Remember like building things and meeting people and solving interesting problems. We all love that, right? Programming is amazing. you get to build cool things. It's a creative process. We all love it. And I want to talk a bit about, after I said you really don't have to do open source, and if you don't do open source, it doesn't mean you're a bad person or a bad programmer or inadequate. I want to talk about why you should consider doing open source anyway. Because I think open source has done a lot for me, and I think it might be able to do the same for you. So the first thing I wanna say about it is that you get to interact with some of the smartest and kindest people you will ever meet. You'll go on a debate, on a page, on an issue on GitHub, and you'll have a bunch of people who you only read about until now, right? You see them in the blog post, you see them in big libraries, and your first expectation is, hey, they're not gonna wanna talk to me. I'm not smart enough, I'm not competent enough, maybe I'm not good enough to contribute. And those people are typically not just some of the smartest people I interact with, they're also some of the kindest people I get to interact with. Those people are very empathic. Those people will actually listen to you a lot of the time. Not all of them, not all projects are like this, but my experience, at least in Node and some projects, has been that a lot of people will actually like talking to you and they will want you to help because they're excited about this thing they're building and they're excited about you wanting to help. And you get to solve problems for hundreds of thousands of people, right? So at my job, I work at a company that does something amazing, but I'm solving a problem for, I don't know, maybe like 100 people, 1,000 people, like 10,000 people. When you do open source, you can write a library. Like, let's ignore the big ones and look at the left one. That's TMP Promise. It's just a wrapper, right, for like the library called TMP. And that has, I think, like 30,000 downloads a week right now. And you get to reach a lot of people and help a lot of people just by doing this thing. And you get to close the knowledge gap, right? Because not everyone has a lot of money for servers and training, all of that. And by contributing to open source, and contributing to open source is not just code. If you contribute docs, that's great. We have more people who contribute code and contribute docs in Node, and we need more people to actually work on the education stuff. And you get to help people in very like unfortunate areas, which is exciting to me. And you learn new things in depth, right? The first time I worked on a proposal for JavaScript, I remember just learning a ton of things about how strings work and how things work under the hood and like engine stuff and encoding stuff and a bunch of things I would never know otherwise. And a big one is you learn about the struggle that everyone is facing, right? A common factor in Node. Like, if I had to guess a few years ago, what is the common factor in like the big working groups in Node, like the most accomplished, I think, developers in the project, it's not like knowing Rust very well. It's not having side projects. It's not working at home. It's actually like self-care and meditation. These people do sport, and these people meditate. And the reason they do it is because those people are very good at self-care. Those people take care of themselves. And you learn it's a struggle for everyone. And you learn that including people really improves technology. I had a hard time believing this when I started. I thought, why are we spending all this time on inclusivity? And then I started seeing people who would not contribute otherwise come into the project and building a ton of really impressive stuff. Most of the new modules in Node are built by people who are not traditional collaborators in the project. And rather than holding opinions about what people get offended by, you just accept each other and you build stuff together. And that's amazing. And this one is obvious. You improve your skills, right? You get code reviews from some of the smartest people. Like I remember the first time I got a code review from someone who had a Wikipedia page, and it was like impressive. And then I started getting in reviews from people who are building big libraries. And I remember having an aha moment when someone asked me for a review in their library when it was a new library. You learn about problems you never knew existed, and it's amazing. And it combats the fear. Because in big respected projects, when you go to other developers, you learn they all struggle. You learn that the most impressive developers that you read about, they all have this. They all, I'm not sure that all of them, but a lot of them have this. A lot of them have the same fear that maybe they're not good enough. And when I go to, when I feel like I'm an imposter, which does happen, I talk to other collaborators. And they don't tell me, hey, you're a good programmer. They don't tell me, hey, you're amazing, don't feel like this. They tell me I feel this too. They tell me I'm struggling too. And communities battle the fear together, right? If I'm not sure if I'm adequate, I have a hard time to measure myself. The stack is changing. Everyone is calling everyone stupid. It's very hard to know where you stand. But if you're part of a community, of an open source project, you can talk to others for support. And that's amazing, because communities can battle the fear together. Now, I want to talk about something personal. I want to talk about my experience. So, in JavaScript, we have this thing called callbacks, and we have this thing called promises. And about 6, 7, 8 years ago, callbacks were all the rage. Like, no one was using promises. Promises were this esoteric thing no one was using. Everyone was calling everyone stupid over it, and no one knew promises. And I didn't know promises in 2012. So obviously, I held the very strong opinions that promises are the wrong way forward, right? Because I was scared. I didn't understand how they worked. I used to say that, sometimes in private, sometimes out loud. Promises are the wrong way forward, it's a broken abstraction, everyone using them is stupid, and all those nasty things. And then something amazing happened. I flew to Finland to work on a startup I was involved in back then. And I met this guy called Petka I knew from Stack Overflow chat, which is a nice place, by the way. And we talked, and we got drunk, and he went into this raging rant about how promise libraries are slow, but promises being the right abstraction. And I was like teasing him, and eventually he came out with Bluebird the second time we met. And we started talking about it, and there was a lot of API talk about getting the library better to a point. And he taught me a lot, and he made me a core team member, and we started building it. And it wasn't very popular to begin with. It took a lot of time for the library to be stable and good and get a lot of downloads. But it was a very interesting experience to have someone believe in you and start teaching you things so you can contribute. So obviously, I grew up and I stopped saying things are broken, you shouldn't use things. That's not what happened at all, right? So what happened immediately afterwards in 2014 was me saying, hey, promises are the only way forward, you should only use promises, because I felt attacked. When you're building a tool that is used by 1% of the community, and 99% of the community are constantly telling you that you are wrong, you get defensive. You start thinking that maybe I'm wrong. And arguing with people about this never worked. There is not one person I convinced by talking to them and arguing about it. What did work was going on Stack Overflow for 1 year and answering every single promise question. So in that year, I had, I think, 700 answers in Stack Overflow in the promise tag. And Stack Overflow is I think there is a big culture problem in Stack Overflow, but it's also a great tool and a great way to build self-worth, because you see practically that you're helping people. You see that people are using your things and are enjoying your answers, and you get thank you, and it's a great way to build self-worth. So answering the questions really help promote promises, in my opinion. And I want to talk about this guy for a second. His name is Bergus, and what he did is just answer the questions without getting into any of the arguments. And if you learn anything, do that. Don't argue with people, just talk about what you believe in, and try to help people in the technologies you care about. And a big part of internet culture is getting people saying that. And it's really sad, because when you start arguing with people very kind of violently online, you get very smart people telling you, I don't want to participate in this anymore. This has a real negative impact on my mental health. I feel like I'm going insane from this. And it's a very scary thing to say, because it's people you really care about. It's people who are very smart, who have a lot of experience in technology. And suddenly they don't want to engage, and they get burned out, which is terrible. So eventually I learned that I need to listen to people, and Bluebird got popular, and everything worked out. So it ended up being a very positive experience for me. But don't go negative route. It doesn't help, really. So how do I get started in open source? Right? So after we covered the fact you don't have to do it, and after we covered the fact that if you don't do open source, you're still a competent programmer, we also talked about why it's fun and why you should consider it. So let's talk about the how, right? Find a technology you care about. And this is not going to be like an open a pull request in GitHub talk. Because I think everyone here is competent enough to figure out the technical know-how. This is not what people are stuck on, in my experience. You find a project you already know and care about. Ask collaborators how to engage. If I had one slide, this would probably be it, right? Because what people do is that they are not sure how to get started. And the easiest thing to do is just ask. If there's a project you care about, if you use, I don't know, Webpack, and you really care about Webpack, you can just ping the collaborators. If you use React and you want to contribute in React, you ping the collaborators. Just going to the repository and trying to figure things out is much harder than talking to people. Now, sometimes, because we all have, not all of us, but a lot of us have imposter syndrome, it's scary to talk to the collaborators because maybe they'll think we're stupid. So there is a file called contributing.md, thank you, that shows how to contribute. And that's a good second alternative. But it's really much better to just go to the repository and ask the collaborator how to contribute, because it's way easier than the alternative. Now, I want to talk about self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is a term from psychology, and I'm not a psychologist. It's essentially your belief in your ability to accomplish goals. It's your belief in your own competence. It's my belief as a programmer that I will be able to accomplish the goals. And self-efficacy is trainable. It's something you can work on in open source, and we'll talk about how and why, and it helps you. Now, I said I teach high school once a month. I teach kids C++ once a month in the less privileged areas of Israel. And when I teach my students C++, I don't actually care if they know C++, right? That's not what I'm going for. Because Magshimim, like that program, they taught me that it doesn't really matter if the student knows C++ very well. It matters if they believe they can learn. Because afterwards, they just go and they learn everything. They go and learn a bunch of other programming languages on their own. Because self-efficacy is trainable, and in Magshimim, they train it. They actually spend time trying to get the students to believe in themselves, and that works beautifully. Because low self-efficacy, and there's actually citations for the research, it's all scientific research, leads to the belief things are harder than they actually are, right? So if you do open source, and you think maybe I'm not good enough, and then you train your self-efficacy, you get to a point where it's good enough to the point where you think you can contribute, that combats that imposter syndrome. And high self-efficacy leads to not blaming low ability. Out of every, I think, 7 PRs I make to open source projects, 1 lands. Out of every 7 features I work on, maybe even like 1 lands, because it's a hard problem. When you build a project that millions of people use, you can't just assume everything you do is going to land. It's a lot of hard work. And people with high self-efficacy undertake more tasks. They try more things, and when they fail, they blame themselves less. So consider training your self-efficacy, and there's tools to do this. And I think the easiest one is starting in small open source projects and contributing. Now, I want to talk about Node.js for a minute. So Node.js is an open source project. Node.js is open source, and it's actually quite committed to being a safe place for people to contribute in. We really want to get collaborators and people to participate. And it didn't actually used to be this way. It used to be a bit like edgy. When I started contributing to Node.js, maybe 2014, 2015, it was a very different place. And the technology has benefited a lot. Because we are doing the best we can right now to shield you from the fear, to help you deal with it, to build a community. And it's a place people contribute in. And the transition from a place that's hard to contribute in to a place that's better to contribute in is a long one. It took a lot of time to get to a point where people felt comfortable contributing in Node.js. It used to have a lot of fear. It used to have a lot of drama. And I think a big win for Node, and if any of you are doing open source projects, is the consensus-seeking model, which says if someone has strong opinions, let them iron it out and talk to each other. Because essentially, burnout is caring. When you care about something and you can't do a change, you can't change things, you get burned out because you get very frustrated and you don't want to touch computer anymore. So you will be heard, even if you won't be agreed with. And I think it's important that people are heard. So I want to give you some tips for open source, for contributing. And again, this is just what worked for me. Always assume good faith, right? Do not assume that people that are coming to your repository are there to troll you or trying to get on your nerves. And the thing is, even if they are there to troll you, even if they're just trying to be funny or clever or annoying, assuming good faith generally works better than trying to fight them. Because 9 out of 10 times, in my experience, when people are bothered by something, they actually are bothered by something, and fixing it quickly just helps. Be empathic. Remember, a lot of us have fear, a lot of us have imposter syndrome, and a lot of us have a very hard time. So a lot of other people you will be interacting with have this problem. Be empathic to those people, even those with fear. And chase what motivates you. If you're excited about C++ and you don't like Rust, go do C++. If you're excited about WebAssembly and you don't like JavaScript, go do WebAssembly. In your own free time, do whatever motivates you, because motivation and creativity is the important part. Do public speaking, especially if it scares you. It's a great way to meet people and interact. It's scary. I'm a little scared right now. And there's a feeling that people who stand on this stage are special or smarter or prettier. We're not. It's just it's just being there. It's just being present. It's just doing it. So try it, especially if it scares you. And again, if you don't, you really don't have to. And stick with it. The biggest mistake I see in open source is like someone would open a PR for a library and it wouldn't get accepted because the rate, at least for new projects, is about 1 out of 7 PRs that get accepted. And then it doesn't get accepted, and it validates their fear. They say, hey, I made a PR, it didn't get accepted, I am not smart enough. And that's not fair. You need to be compassionate to yourself. Because if you want to do open source, instead of saying, I will do this one PR to Node, I will do this one PR to Angular, say, I will do 7 attempts at a PR over 6 weeks, and I will spend 3 hours each on it. And do the same thing you would do at your job. If you program professionally and you go to your work and things don't work out the first time, it doesn't mean you're bad. It means you're learning. It's grist for the mill. And belong to a community, right? Communities battle the fear. Doing everything yourself is very hard. And community activities focus on building and sharing. And going to conferences like this one is a great way to do that, to meet people, to interact, to learn. Every now and then, there will be someone who is poisonous, who is so scared to the point they're not friendly and they're being nasty towards you. Open source is huge. There are hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of projects. You don't have to tolerate it. We have a huge community. You deserve to be heard, and you deserve to contribute in a way that you find meaningful, right? It's volunteering. It's stuff you do in your own free time. If you meet someone who is poisonous, you don't have to put up with it. And make friends with the fear, right? It's not. I can't tell you not to be afraid because it's scary, but you can be aware of the fear. You can be aware of the doubts you have sometimes. And practice self-compassion. Accomplishments in our field come from hard work. They don't come from being like a genius. Most people I know who are very accomplished aren't very accomplished because they have a very high IQ score. They're very accomplished because they work hard. They spend a lot of time on the projects they're using. They're accomplished because they spend the time and they're aware of the fear. Right, so if anyone wants to contribute to Node.js in particular, or you want to get into contributing to an open source project that's not Node.js, ping me. I'm here and I'm available and I will talk to you. I don't promise that I will answer quickly, but I promise you a conversation. Thank you.